So, what did you get for Halloween, Charlie Brown?
Great pumpkin king.
Mm-hmm. I'm a late baby boomer. What can I say? Anyway. I know that it is there are a few stories in the Bible that would make really good Halloween texts. I'm not going to use them. Or at least not any of the ones that you would think of first. So, no Saul in the medium of Endor. No Jesus walking on the water and the disciples thinking that he was a ghost coming towards them. None of that. Instead, we're going to go back about 200 years to start with, to the summer of 1816 in Geneva. And three very famous people were having a miserable holiday because it was a wet and rainy summer, and they decided to have a contest to see who could write the best horror, come up with the best horror story. Well, we remember the contributions of two of them. The third, I really don't remember anything along those lines from. The two that we remember are George Gordon, who is better known as Lord Byron, the poet, who wrote one of the earliest vampire novels in English, and Mary Shelley, who, of course, wrote Frankenstein. The third one was Percy Bysshe Shelley, who is known best as a poet, although I suppose you could sort of stretch and say his poem Ozymandias, which is actually about a colossal statue of Ramesses II, sort of goes off in that direction. But I want to concentrate on Mary Shelley and Frankenstein first, because we all know the basic outlines of the story. You know, young Victor Frankenstein gets into strange experiments. His mother has recently died, and so in order to deal with his grief, he throws himself into his science. He, as a kid, was interested in the writings of the old alchemists, and then he found out that they weren't all that accurate. And of course, this is the age of marvels. You know, the battery has just been invented. Benjamin Franklin has proved that lightning is electricity, and so on. And he comes up with this secret formula to animate non-living material. And he creates this creature. He wants it to be unmistakable, and he tries to make it handsome because, you know, everybody knows that human beings are programmed with certain prejudices, and one of them is that we privilege wealth, we privilege youth, and we privilege beauty. And we decry privileging any and all three of them, and we still do it. So he animates this creature, which is 8 feet tall, but in proportion. except that it doesn't go according to plan, and the creature is a grotesque. And horrified at what he has done, and in later versions he has electrodes during a thunderstorm, and the lightning comes in, and that's what animates the creature. But anyway, horrified at what he has done, he flees from his laboratory, runs into one of his childhood friends, and when he goes back around to the laboratory the next day, the creature is gone. And the creature winds up at the cottage, well, at a sort of a lean-to or a shed outside this cottage. This poor family, the father is blind. And by observing the family, the creature learns to speak because, at the moment of animation, he wasn't able to speak. He gets an idea of some manners and actually starts to become something of a deep thinker. But to make a very long story very short, when the family discovers him, because he hears one night when the family is out and hasn't gotten back home yet, he hears the blind father crying out for help, so he goes to help. And he and the father are getting along very well. And then the family comes and is afraid of him and drives him off. And of course, that poisons his relationship with all other humans, and he decides to seek out his creator and either force him to create a mate for him, or he's going to kill his maker. And long set of adventures. They end up chasing each other for a while. The planned mate doesn't come off because Frankenstein is, frankly, horrified to people the world with a race of monsters. And so they end up chasing all the way up into the Arctic, up to the very outskirts of the North Pole. And no, there is no Santa's castle there. I know. And Frankenstein relates his story. He's picked up by this ship that passes by, because they can see this gigantic figure driving a sled across the ice. But they find this fellow who's nearly dead from exposure, and it's Frankenstein. So he relates the story. And the creature, and after he dies, the creature goes off into the Arctic and is never seen again. Those of you who know something about European folklore might recognize some elements of this story in the older Jewish legends of the Golem, where the versions of that story usually have a rabbi. The most famous early version says that it was Rabbi Judah Lo ben Bezalel of Prague, also called the Maharal, who creates this artificial human out of clay. And in order to make a golem, supposedly you circle the simulacrum, you say special Kabbalistic prayers over it, and then either you trace somewhere on it the Hebrew word emet, which is truth, or you put in its mouth a piece of paper or parchment that has the sacred, unpronounceable name of God on it, and the creature will animate. Well, in most of these stories, it's sort of like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. You know, have we all heard that story or seen the Fantasia? Right, okay. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. The golem is there originally to guard the Jewish people against the hatred of their neighbors, especially the Jewish children. But again, it gets out of control, and its creator decides that it has to be put down. So either you snatch the piece of paper out of its mouth with the sacred, unpronounceable name of God on it, or you strike the initial letter of the word emet, which is truth, and it becomes the word met, which is death. And the thing crumbles into dust. And it just so happens, first of all, that the word golem does appear once in the Hebrew Bible. I think it's in the 139th Psalm, and it means something along the lines of unformed or unfashioned. But it also just so happens that the outlines of that story bear a resemblance to another story that we all know but don't think about in this way. When men began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took to wife such of them as they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, but his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the ground, man and beast and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I've made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So you see the same pattern. The creation runs amok. The Creator decides that the creation has to be put down. And so we know the basic outlines of the Noah story. Building the ark, gathering the animals, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and then waters on the ground up to a year. And everything that is outside the ark dies. And I don't mind saying that in the face of a universal disaster like that, I would much rather have Abraham living on my street than Noah. Because when Abraham is faced with the destruction of 5 towns, on the edge of the southern shore of the Dead Sea, what does he do? He bargains God, starting at 50 righteous people. You can't kill the just with the unjust. It isn't right. And he gets God to agree that even if only 10 righteous men are found in the city of Sodom, that God will spare it. And that is why the minimum number of, traditionally of Jewish men that you have to have in order to do any sort of religious ceremony in Judaism is 10. Noah, on the other hand, is given the same test and says not a word. In fact, the Jewish rabbis noticed that very early. Some of them remarked that, Abraham was called righteous. Noah was righteous, but only in his generation. And let's see, one of them even has God accosting Noah and calling him and telling him, I meant for you to be my conscience, but you became my accomplice. The sense is that there was a test involved there of Noah, and he didn't altogether pass it. But of course, there are those who say that just like the binding of Isaac, or the sacrifice of Isaac is what we call it in Christian tradition, is a story that is meant to show you how you aren't supposed to sacrifice your children to God, that God really doesn't want you to offer up your children, your firstborn, as a burnt offering. It might be that the point of the flood legend, and if there is any historical basis to it, the best thing to account for the worldwide spread of it is probably the rise of sea level at the end of the last ice age. That the point of the Noah story is not so much that it doesn't work because there is obviously wickedness after that, human wickedness after that in the Bible and also in the present day. So God has to come up with a different plan. But the point of the story might be that God is not the sort of God who will lash out and indiscriminately destroy the entire world. And the strategy that God comes up with, of course, is to start with a single man, then his family, then one of his descendants, then one of his descendants for the people who aren't his descendants, who will gather in the rest of the world. And of course the Muslims would say that one of his other descendants is sent to call in the people of Arabia. But since humans are going to be humans, or if you want to use the words of Walt Kelly and adapt them a bit, we have met the golem and he is us. Since humans are going to be humans, You can't just get rid of all of them. You've got to find a way to live in the same world with them. And that is not a bad lesson for the rest of us. We are currently at a period of reevaluation of old stories, old views of history. And to take an example, yes, it is true that Winston Churchill was a horrible racist. He was a colonialist. But he also kept Hitler from winning. And much as you decry the one, you have to allow the other. We are not monochrome creatures. You have to take people as you find them. And you have to shine God's light so that they can become better.